Welcome to Fall Asleep Channel. Tonight, biological observation of nocturnal birds, moving in balance with night, sound, and light, a calm narrative with interesting facts. Now allow yourself to get comfortable and enjoy quiet and pleasant rest. Let's begin. Twilight settles unevenly across different latitudes, light thinning through cloud layers and tree canopies, fading first in hollows and undergrowth, then across open ground, contrasts softening, edges losing certainty, the air cooling in small steps, warmer pockets lingering near stone and bark, colder layers gathering above grass and water, sound carrying differently as temperature shifts, distant movement becoming clearer in the quiet, a perched form remaining still where a branch meets the trunk, feathers lying close along the back, down beneath, holding warmth in place, body heat conserved through trapped air, metabolism steady and low, respiration calm, the feet closed around wood with passive tension, tendons holding without effort, balance maintained through minor adjustments too small to be seen, the head appearing broad compared to the narrow torso, not excess mass, but space for sensory structures, eyes large and forward-facing, fixed within the skull and unable to rotate, vision redirected by slow movement of the neck, vertebrae numerous and flexible, rotation extending far beyond most birds, achieved without interrupting blood flow as arteries follow protected pathways. The face shaped into a shallow disc of feathers, curves designed to gather sound, funneling faint vibrations toward ear openings. Ear placement often asymmetric, one higher than the other, improving vertical sound localization, timing differences measured in fractions of a second, direction resolved without visible motion, hearing remaining active even when the body rests. The sound field mapped continuously, leaves shifting, insects moving through stems, small mammals passing under litter, each producing a signature of contact and pause. The listening is not hurried, it is simply ongoing. Stillness held for long periods, not absence of behavior, but a form of energy economy, movement reserved for conditions that support efficiency, wind altering the usefulness of sound, rain dampening high frequencies, snow reflecting faint noises and changing the way steps register. Hunting strategies adjust to these changes without display, perches chosen for acoustic access and clear sight lines, fence posts at field margins, dead branches above trails, rocky ledges near open water, and sometimes human structures that provide height and stable footing. Observation continues without pursuit, waiting becoming the dominant method, the body aligned with the branch, the tail acting as a small stabilizer, the wings folded tightly to reduce heat loss, feathers overlapping like shingles, creating a smooth surface that limits air exchange. In colder regions, plumage thickens seasonally, increasing insulation. In warmer climates, feather density and behavior help avoid overheating. Shade used, activity shifted toward cooler hours. Evaporative loss minimized. Across the group, size varies widely. Some forms compact enough to move through dense understory. Others broad-winged and heavy-bodied, built for slow flight over open ground, wing loading differing between habitats. Long wings favoring glide and low-energy travel. Shorter wings favoring rapid maneuvering among trees. The flight itself begins with little sound, primary feathers carrying serrated leading edges, fringes breaking up airflow, turbulence reduced before it becomes noise, secondary feathers softened with velvety surfaces that absorb remaining sound, the downy texture muting friction between feather layers. Each wing beat slower than expected for the body size, lift generated at low speed, allowing movement close to the ground without alarm. Head held stable while wings move, neck muscles damping oscillation, gaze steady on a fixed point, the eyes gathering limited light through wide pupils, retinas dominated by rod cells tuned for sensitivity, color discrimination reduced, detail built from contrast and motion, brightness interpreted as a gradient rather than a sharp boundary. And when blinking occurs, a translucent membrane crosses the eye briefly, cleaning and moistening without blocking sight. The beak small compared to the head, partly hidden by facial feathers, reducing reflections in dim light. The feet prepared for brief, rapid closure, toes and talons curved for grasping, surfaces tested at impact with fine positional control. Prey capture, when it happens, is short and efficient. Details remain minimal. Action contained within function. Digestion proceeds slowly afterward. Energy released over time. Supporting long intervals of quiet, pellets form from indigestible material, compacted in the stomach and later regurgitated, a routine process that clears the digestive tract without haste. Daytime roosting occurs in locations that reduce disturbance, dense foliage, cavities, shaded ledges, orientations chosen to avoid direct sun and to reduce detection, posture tightened during rest, feathers drawn closer, the head sometimes tucked for heat conservation. In warmer conditions, plumage loosened slightly to allow airflow, thermoregulation maintained through subtle changes rather than overt motion. Across different regions, activity timing shifts. In some places, hunting concentrates at dusk and dawn, crepuscular windows offering enough light for vision and enough darkness for stealth. In other places, full night provides the best acoustic conditions, moonlight changing exposure and altering movement patterns of prey, cloud cover reducing brightness and extending the period of effective low-light hunting, precipitation suppressing some prey activity and increasing waiting time. The territory is monitored rather than announced. Familiarity with landscape features reduces energy costs, routes between perches reused, angles of approach kept consistent, sound reflections from trees, hedgerows, and rock faces learned through repeated exposure, memory supporting efficiency, but behavior remaining understated. Nests are rarely built as elaborate structures. Many species rely on existing cavities in trees or cliffs, abandoned stick nests made by other birds, hollows in cacti or earthen banks, minimal lining added, sometimes only a few feathers or plant fibers. The investment placed in site selection, safety from weather and predators, stable temperature, proximity to hunting grounds. Eggs laid with intervals, incubation steady, adults alternating quietly, shift changes occurring without conspicuous display, the young hatch covered in down, eyes closed at first, body temperature supported by brooding, development progressing gradually, coordination emerging in stages, standing before walking, wing flapping before flight, feathers replacing down over time, growth rates influenced by food availability and climate. In some species, siblings hatch asynchronously, size differences appearing early. Competition expressed mostly through position and access rather than overt conflict. Care continues for weeks beyond first flight. Fledglings moving clumsily between branches, calling softly at times. Adults delivering food with spacing that reflects hunting success and energy balance. Long pauses between feedings are common. Stillness returning after brief exchanges. In landscapes with extended daylight, activity adapts rather than stops. At high latitudes, darkness may be brief in summer, hunting compressing into narrower windows. In winter, long nights expand opportunity but increase thermoregulatory cost. Plumage and behavior compensate. Rest periods redistributed. Internal rhythms remain flexible. Some species remain resident year-round. Others shift range seasonally in response to prey cycles. Movements guided by resource availability rather than temperature alone. Prey type varies with habitat. Small mammals dominating in many regions. Birds taken opportunistically. Insects and amphibians in warmer climates. Diet breadth reflecting local abundance. Hearing supports detection under snow. A faint scratch, a shift in crust. The timing difference between ears providing elevation cues. The facial disc adjusting subtly as feathers lift and settle, changing the way sound is focused. Head tilts, small but precise. Triangulation repeated until position is resolved. Then movement occurs. Silent flight, low approach, and return to stillness. The process repeating without escalation. A system tuned for low light and low energy expenditure. Posture steady. Listening continuous. Adjustment constant. Balance maintained. And as the night deepens further, the environment continues to change in small ways. Air cooling, humidity rising near water, insects quieting, mammals shifting their routes, and the feathered night watchers remain integrated into this gradual movement of conditions, present without announcing, active without urgency, continuing through cycles that have no sharp beginning and no definite end. Only the quiet persistence of observation, response, and long intervals of measured stillness. The hours extend without signal, darkness deepening unevenly beneath cloud cover and canopy gaps, sound traveling farther where air cools, then softening again as moisture settles. Perches remain occupied for long spans, bodies conserving heat through minimal movement, feathers adjusting microscopically as muscles release and re-engage, insulation maintained through layered structure rather than active control, circulation shifting slightly toward the core, extremities remaining functional without excess heat loss, respiration slow and regular, oxygen exchange efficient even at rest, the skeleton supporting prolonged stillness, joints aligned to reduce strain, slow twitch muscle fibers maintaining posture without fatigue, the head held upright or angled downward, neck muscles relaxed yet responsive, rotation occurring only when needed, smooth arcs rather than quick turns, the eyes continuing to gather faint light, pupils remaining wide, retinal sensitivity compensating for limited illumination, motion detected more readily than form, the boundary between shadow and movement becoming the primary visual cue, hearing continuing as the dominant sense, low-frequency sounds traveling farther at night, high frequencies attenuated by foliage and humidity, the auditory system filtering noise automatically, steady background ignored, irregular patterns retained, pauses between sounds carrying as much information as sound itself, listening occurring even during brief sleep phases, hemispheric rest allowing partial shutdown while awareness remains, one eye sometimes closed, the other oriented toward open space, vigilance maintained without full wakefulness, weather passing slowly through the landscape, fog forming near ground level, dampening echoes and softening contours, rain beginning lightly, droplets absorbed by feathers before reaching the skin, water shedding along overlapping veins, insulation preserved despite moisture. Hunting pauses lengthen when sound conditions degrade, waiting extended rather than abandoned, patience favored over pursuit, the environment offering renewed opportunity as conditions shift again, wind altering direction and speed, branches moving and creating false signals, the head compensating with finer discrimination, false positives dismissed, only consistent patterns retained, the body remaining anchored to the perch, wings unused, energy conserved. Across open ground, small mammals alter routes under changing cover. Movements become more cautious, pauses lengthen, acoustic signatures shift accordingly, detection adapting to these changes without conscious adjustment, the facial disc remaining subtly dynamic, feathers lifting or settling with changes in airflow, altering sound focus by small degrees, sensitivity maintained across varying conditions. When flight resumes, takeoff remains controlled, wings opening gradually, the first downstroke broad and slow, air displaced evenly, no sudden pressure change, ascent shallow, glide favored over climb, the body remaining level, tail adjusting pitch slightly, the head remaining fixed in space, visual target maintained throughout movement, landing precise, feet reaching forward at the last moment, talons closing with exact timing, impact absorbed through joints rather than muscle force. Stillness returning immediately after contact, no lingering motion, digestion continuing quietly, stomach acids working slowly, nutrients absorbed over time, waste compacted efficiently, energy budget balanced over long periods rather than individual events. The surrounding landscape continues its gradual transitions, night insects declining toward cooler hours, some species replacing others, soundscape thinning then thickening again, birds that move during twilight settling into rest, diurnal species becoming silent, leaving acoustic space more open. This absence increasing detection range in wooded areas, sound reflecting differently as leaves cool and stiffen. In open fields, frost forming on grasses, altering footfall noise for animals below. Detection thresholds shift accordingly. In urban edges, artificial light creating uneven brightness, activity patterns adjusting, hunting zones shifting away from illuminated patches, shadows preferred, structures used as acoustic vantage points, adaptability expressed through behavior rather than morphology, internal rhythms remaining flexible. Across the globe, similar adjustments occur under different skies, desert nights cooling rapidly, tropical nights remaining warm and humid, temperate regions cycling through seasons, responses shaped by local constraints but guided by shared principles, low light, quiet movement, efficient listening. Nests remain unused during most of the year, occupied only during breeding periods. Outside that time, roosting sites shift frequently, disturbance avoided through relocation rather than defense, familiarity with multiple shelters reducing risk, memory mapping safe locations across the territory, breeding timing influenced by prey abundance rather than fixed calendar dates, egg laying synchronized loosely with peak food availability, growth paced by delivery rates, developmental timelines adjusting without disruption. In lean years, broods smaller. In abundant years, growth faster but still measured, survival favored over speed. As nights progress toward early morning, temperature often reaches its lowest point. Activity may increase briefly, prey movement responding to cold stress, opportunities emerging within narrow windows, then fading again as light returns. Dawn approaching gradually, not as an event, but as a slow increase in ambient brightness, shadows thinning, contrast returning, hunting efficiency declining as visibility increases for others, movement tapering off, roosts selected before full light, entry quiet and unobserved, posture shifting toward rest, feathers settling, eyes narrowing, listening continuing at reduced intensity, daytime hours passing in long intervals of inactivity, punctuated only by minor adjustments to maintain comfort and concealment. The cycle repeating with variation but no interruption. Observation giving way to response, response followed by rest, energy conserved, information accumulated, balance maintained across changing conditions. And as the sequence continues night after night, across forests, fields, tundra margins, and human-altered landscapes, the same measured pattern persists. Quiet presence, minimal motion, continuous listening, adaptation unfolding without display, integrated into the slow movement of air, sound, and light, without clear beginning and without final pause. Rest deepens as light continues to return slowly, not abruptly, but as a gradual increase in contrast along edges of bark and stone. Roosting positions remain unchanged for long spans, bodies aligned to reduce exposure, feathers drawn close where air cools, loosened slightly where warmth builds, micro-adjustments occurring without visible movement, the skin beneath feathers responding to temperature and pressure, blood flow shifting subtly to maintain balance, heart rate steady and low, digestion continuing at an even pace, energy released gradually rather than stored, allowing long periods without feeding, the head sometimes rotating a few degrees, checking orientation, then returning to stillness, the neck relaxing again into alignment, the eyes partially closed, not fully disengaged, light still detected through narrow openings, shadow movement registered even during rest, auditory awareness reduced but not absent, sudden changes still processed, wind moving foliage, distant human noise passing and fading, rain beginning and ending without response, stillness favored unless adjustment becomes necessary. Daytime hours pass in this manner, not empty, but quiet and economical, the surrounding environment shifting through temperature cycles, insects becoming active and then quiet again, small birds moving briefly through the area, ignored unless disturbance increases, concealment maintained through color and texture, plumage patterns breaking up outlines, mottling matching bark and stone, vertical striping blending with reeds and grasses, posture reinforcing camouflage, the body held upright and narrow, minimizing shadow, heat loss minimized through reduced surface exposure. When heat builds, feathers lift slightly, allowing air circulation along the skin, evaporative cooling occurring without panting, moisture loss kept low, the absence of unnecessary motion preserving hydration. In warmer regions, rest sites chosen for airflow, shaded openings, cliff faces catching steady wind. In colder regions, roosts selected for protection, cavities reducing convection, evergreen cover limiting radiative loss, snow accumulating on outer feathers without melting, insulation maintained beneath, seasonal changes altering these choices gradually, migration absent in many forms, familiarity with local terrain reducing energy cost, year-round knowledge of prey paths and shelter locations maintained, others shifting range when food availability changes, movements slow and deliberate, stopovers brief, perches reused when conditions allow, orientation guided by landmarks and memory rather than celestial cues alone. As afternoon progresses, light angle changes again, shadows lengthening, contrast increasing near ground level. Activity does not resume immediately. Readiness builds slowly, metabolic rate increasing slightly, muscle tone rising, sensory thresholds sharpening, the transition from rest to activity occurring without display, feathers settling into flight-ready alignment, wing joints loosening, the head lifting a few degrees higher, listening resuming as the primary engagement, early movement detected at field edges, rodents emerging cautiously, birds shifting roosts, insect sound increasing, the sound field filling gradually rather than suddenly, crepuscular hours offering balanced conditions, enough light for navigation, enough darkness for concealment, hunting resumes selectively, not every opportunity taken, efficiency guiding choice, perches repositioned to match wind direction and sound travel, flight paths adjusted to avoid silhouetting against the sky, approach angles chosen to minimize exposure, each action conserving energy and reducing risk. As darkness settles again, the cycle continues without emphasis, not marked by ritual or signal, but by a return to familiar patterns, listening, waiting, brief movement, and long stillness across seasons and habitats. The same principles apply, structure supporting function, behavior shaped by physics and physiology, responses guided by sound, light, and energy balance, without urgency, without conclusion, continuing forward through repeating nights, held within a rhythm that does not announce itself and does not end. Night settles again with familiar slowness, darkness not uniform, but layered, deeper beneath foliage, thinner above open ground, temperature dropping in shallow gradients, air becoming denser near soil and water, sound bending closer to the surface, faint movements traveling farther before dissolving. Perched forms remain patient, bodies aligned with branches, beams, or rock faces, skeletal structure bearing weight efficiently, joints stacked to reduce strain, muscles resting while tendons maintain position, fatigue delayed through anatomy rather than effort, the chest expanding and contracting gently, breathing steady, oxygen delivered with minimal cost, energy expenditure remaining low even during alertness, the sensory field rebuilding as conditions stabilize, humidity settling, wind easing, background noise thinning, listening becoming more precise as interference fades, the facial disc holding its shallow curve, feathers responding subtly to air pressure, sound reflected inward and focused, ear asymmetry continuing to provide vertical resolution, distance estimated through intensity and delay, motion inferred from rhythm rather than speed, the head tilting by small degrees, not scanning broadly, but refining alignment, each adjustment narrowing uncertainty, visual input remaining secondary, light scarce but usable, silhouettes forming briefly against the sky, stars and moon filtered through cloud, brightness shifting with passing cover, pupils adjusting automatically, retinal sensitivity maintaining awareness without strain, the eyes remaining fixed, no independent movement, orientation achieved entirely through neck rotation, rotation smooth and controlled, never abrupt, circulation protected through specialized vessel pathways, preventing compression even at extreme angles. Flight remains infrequent, used only when conditions favor success, waiting still dominant. Perches chosen again and again for reliability, locations learned through repetition, angles memorized, sound reflections anticipated, false echoes discounted. When movement begins, it remains contained, wings opening silently, air displaced in broad, slow sheets, lift generated without rush, trajectory shallow, approach steady, the body never accelerating beyond what control allows, landing precise, contact brief, stillness immediate, prey intake, supporting long-term balance rather than short-term gain, diet reflecting availability, mammals common where grassland dominates, birds taken where migration routes intersect, insects supplementing intake in warmer climates, amphibians and reptiles included where conditions allow, digestive flexibility supporting survival across environments, seasonal shifts altering emphasis rather than forcing change, body mass fluctuating within narrow limits, excess avoided, scarcity endured through efficiency. The surrounding night continues its slow evolution, clouds thickening or thinning, frost forming on exposed surfaces, dew settling on feathers without penetrating insulation, water beating and shedding along feather structure, plumage maintained through occasional preening, oils spread evenly to preserve flexibility and alignment, feathers replaced gradually through molting, not all at once, flight capacity maintained throughout, timing of molt aligned with food availability, growth energy balanced against hunting demands, social interaction minimal, spacing maintained through avoidance rather than conflict, vocalizations rare and purposeful, used primarily during breeding or territorial overlap, most communication occurring indirectly, through absence or presence, timing rather than sound, young individuals learning landscape features through exploration, movement clumsy at first, efficiency increasing with experience, mistakes tolerated when energy reserves allow, mortality shaping populations quietly, without spectacle, lifespan varying widely across species, influenced by size, habitat stability, and human impact. Some individuals persisting for decades, others replaced quickly. Continuity maintained at the population level, not the individual. Human-altered environments introducing new variables. Artificial light extending twilight. Traffic noise masking sound. Structures offering novel perches and cavities. Responses mixed. Some areas avoided, others integrated. Adaptability expressed through behavior rather than rapid change. As the night advances, intervals of activity and rest continue to alternate, not evenly, but in response to shifting opportunity, a brief movement, then extended stillness, the pattern repeating with variation, no accumulation of tension, no release, only continuation, listening maintained, posture steady, energy conserved. The feathered night watchers remaining embedded within the slow dynamics of their surroundings, shaped by air, sound, and diminishing light, operating within limits that favor patience over speed, balance over excess, and persistence over display, the cycle unfolding again and again, without signal and without final boundary. The interval between movements lengthens again, night reaching its quietest phase in many regions, temperature stabilized near its lowest point, air dense and still, sound traveling with little distortion, distant activity becoming easier to separate from background. Perches remain occupied without change, bodies conserving heat through posture and feather alignment, feet maintaining grip without active force, joints locked into place through skeletal design, muscles relaxed but ready, readiness existing without tension, the head angled slightly forward, the facial plane aligned with open space, listening narrowing rather than expanding, attention drawn to irregularities rather than volume, a pause where none is expected, a rhythm interrupted, a faint displacement of sound across leaf litter or frost, auditory maps updating continuously, memory of prior patterns allowing deviation to stand out, visual confirmation minimal, often unnecessary, sound alone sufficient to resolve position, the neck adjusting by small increments, orientation refined, the body remaining still until alignment is complete, movement delayed until probability increases, energy conserved through restraint. When flight occurs, it remains brief, wings opening only as far as required, feathers separating and overlapping smoothly, airflow guided across textured surfaces that reduce turbulence, lift generated efficiently, forward motion shallow and controlled, approach remaining low, silhouette minimized against sky and ground, landing immediate and final, no extra motion, capture swift and contained, digestion beginning soon after, stomach acids breaking down soft tissue, calcium absorbed from bone, nutrients distributed slowly, feeding events spaced widely, long fasting periods normal, fat reserves modest, metabolism adapted to scarcity rather than surplus, rest following intake without urgency, stillness resuming as the dominant state. Across different habitats, similar quiet intervals occur. In forests, windless gaps amplify small sounds. In grasslands, frost alters acoustic properties. In wetlands, water movement carries low-frequency signals farther. Responses adjust automatically, without rehearsal. behavior shaped by repeated exposure rather than conscious choice. Weather fronts pass gradually, pressure changes subtle but felt, cloud layers thickening, moonlight diffused, contrast reduced, hunting efficiency shifting accordingly, waiting extending where conditions degrade, activity resuming when balance returns, the night not uniform, but a sequence of usable and unusable moments, selected through patience. As hours progress toward morning, light begins to change again, not as brightness, but as a slight lifting of shadow density, outlines becoming more defined, contrast increasing along edges, hunting opportunity narrowing, movement tapering off, roost selection resuming, sites chosen earlier in the season reused, entry quiet, wings folded before contact, posture returning to rest, feathers settling into insulating layers, eyes narrowing, listening continuing at low intensity, awareness reduced but not absent, daytime hours unfolding slowly, the cycle entering another long phase of minimal activity across continents and climates. This pattern repeats with local variation, nocturnal birds integrated into environmental rhythms rather than dictating them, their presence measured not by sound or sight, but by the absence of disturbance, the continuity of quiet, the persistence of balance, time passing without markers, activity dissolving back into stillness, and the process continuing forward without emphasis, without closure, maintaining the same measured rhythm as light rises, fades, and returns again. Daylight spreads slowly now, not as a sudden presence, but as a gradual filling of space between shadows, contrast increasing first along edges of leaves and stones, then across open ground, the roost holding its shape through the change, bodies remaining motionless as light strengthens, camouflage becoming more effective rather than less, feather patterns dissolving outlines as brightness increases, mottled browns and grays matching bark and soil, vertical streaks aligning with trunks and reeds, posture narrowing the profile further, heat rising gently as sunlight reaches the surface, feathers adjusting in place, loosening where warmth accumulates, settling again as balance is reached, thermoregulation continuing without visible effort, circulation shifting toward the skin to release excess heat, respiration remaining slow, no urgency introduced by light, soundscape changing gradually, diurnal birds beginning to move and vocalize, insects warming and resuming flight, human activity increasing in distant layers, engines, footsteps, machinery, all passing through the acoustic field as broad, continuous noise, filtered and deprioritized, sharp, irregular sounds still registered, but few demand response, rest deepening rather than breaking, hemispheric sleep alternating quietly, awareness maintained at a low level, enough to detect threat, not enough to disrupt recovery, the digestive process continuing steadily, acids neutralized, nutrients absorbed, waste compacted and stored, energy redistributed to support feather maintenance and cellular repair, micro damage from flight and landing addressed gradually, proteins rebuilt, calcium reserves balanced, feathers preened occasionally during brief waking moments, barbs realigned, oils spread to preserve flexibility and water resistance, grooming restrained and efficient, never prolonged, avoiding unnecessary exposure, As the day advances, ambient temperature reaching its peak in many regions, activity remaining minimal, shade preferred, cavities and dense foliage providing stable microclimates, airflow passing gently through openings, cooling the skin without moisture loss. In arid regions, rest sites chosen to minimize solar gain, orientation adjusted to reduce direct exposure. In humid regions, ventilation prioritized, each choice reflecting local conditions rather than fixed preference, memory guiding selection, experience refining efficiency. The hours pass without event, not empty, but stable, a plateau of low demand, the environment carrying most of the movement, clouds shifting slowly, shadows migrating across the ground, vegetation responding to heat and wind, and within this flow, the resting forms remain unchanged, presence maintained without signal. As afternoon approaches, light angle lowering, contrast softening again, heat beginning to ease, readiness increasing gradually, metabolic rate rising just enough to support alertness, muscle tone returning subtly, not as tension, but as preparedness, feathers settling back into tighter alignment, wing joints loosening slightly, the head lifting a few degrees, listening resuming as the primary engagement, early movement detected once more, rodents adjusting routes, birds shifting roosts, insects changing pitch and density, the sound field reorganizing, and the cycle prepares to turn again, not marked by intention, only by alignment with changing conditions, the same measured pattern ready to resume, stillness giving way to observation, observation to response, response back to rest, continuing forward in quiet repetition, integrated into the slow alternation of light and dark, without declaration and without end. Evening approaches without announcement, light sliding lower along trunks and walls, shadows lengthening and merging, temperature easing down in shallow steps, heat released gradually from stone and soil, air beginning to move more freely again, sound changing texture as density shifts, high frequencies carrying farther, low vibrations settling closer to the ground. Resting forms remain still through these changes, posture unchanged, feathers lying smoothly along the body, insulation maintained as conditions cool, circulation adjusting subtly, warmth retained where needed, released where excess builds, the head lifting slightly higher now, angle changing by a few degrees, listening widening again, attention expanding beyond the immediate perch, early movements registering at field edges and along hedgerows, small mammals resuming activity in brief bursts, pauses long between steps, roots cautious, acoustic signatures distinct against the thinning background noise, the facial plane aligning toward open space, feathers along the disc settling into a precise curve, sound focused inward, ear asymmetry refining vertical resolution, distance estimated without movement, the neck rotating slowly, alignment refined, stillness held until probability increases, no haste introduced by opportunity, readiness existing as a quiet state rather than an action. Wings remain folded, joints loose but unused. The first flight of the evening delayed until conditions align fully, light low enough to reduce detection, soundscape open enough to allow clarity, wind direction stable, When movement begins, it remains restrained. Takeoff smooth, wings opening gradually, air displaced in broad, quiet sheets. No abrupt pressure change. Ascent shallow, glide extended, energy expenditure minimized, approach angles chosen to avoid silhouette, ground cover used to mask movement, landing precise, feet extending only at the last moment, talons closing with controlled force, stillness returning immediately, the environment continuing to adjust around these brief events, insects increasing in number as temperatures stabilize, some species replacing others, calls overlapping, then thinning again, prey activity rising in short windows, then pausing, detection adapting continuously, listening recalibrated with each shift, the night building not as a uniform state, but as a sequence of usable conditions, selected through patience. As darkness deepens further, activity remains sparse, not every opportunity taken, efficiency guiding choice, feeding events spaced widely, digestion proceeding slowly afterward, energy released over time, supporting long intervals of quiet across landscapes shaped by forest, field, tundra, or human structure. The same principles apply: low light, sound-based detection, silent movement, energy balance maintained across hours rather than moments, roosts for the coming day already known, alternatives memorized, disturbance avoided through relocation rather than defense, spacing maintained without interaction, communication minimal, presence understated, the night continuing its slow progression, clouds passing, humidity rising near water, frost forming in colder regions, acoustic properties shifting again, responses adjusting without display. And through these changes, the feathered night watchers remain integrated into the environment rather than distinct from it, acting only when conditions align, resting when they do not, holding stillness as an active state, listening as a constant process, movement as a brief and precise adjustment, the cycle continuing forward, measured, unhurried, without emphasis and without conclusion. Darkness settles into a deeper uniformity now, cloud layers smoothing differences in brightness, moonlight diffused into a general glow rather than distinct shape, ground and canopy blending into a single low-contrast field, sound becoming the primary source of detail again, small shifts in air pressure carrying information across distance, perches remain occupied through long intervals, bodies unmoving, feathers responding only to gravity and air, insulation maintained through structure rather than action, the feet holding position without strain, joints aligned to reduce effort, posture sustained through anatomy designed for stillness. The head remains slightly elevated, not scanning broadly, but oriented toward the most acoustically open space, listening refined further, background noise thinned to a narrow band, irregularities standing out more clearly, a brief rustle, a pause that breaks expected rhythm, a soft displacement of sound beneath grass or leaf litter, the neck rotating by a small degree, alignment adjusted, then held, movement delayed until certainty improves, probability favored over speed. When flight resumes, it remains controlled and brief, wings opening just enough to generate lift, feathers separating smoothly, airflow guided across textured edges that reduce sound before it forms. Glide extended, descent shallow, energy use minimized, approach steady, the body never accelerating beyond what balance allows. Landing precise, contact absorbed through joints, motion ending at once, capture contained, digestion beginning soon after, stomach processes working slowly, nutrients absorbed over extended time, waste compacted efficiently, long gaps between feeding events remaining normal, rest returning immediately. Stillness resumed as the dominant state. Elsewhere in the landscape, similar intervals unfold. In forests, cooling leaves stiffen and change the way sound reflects. In open areas, dew alters surface texture and footfall noise. Near water, humidity carries low-frequency vibration farther. Responses shift automatically, without learning or rehearsal. The night continues to change in small increments, clouds thinning, stars reappearing faintly, temperature dropping another fraction, air settling, detection range extending slightly, opportunity widening, then narrowing again, activity responding in short pulses, not sustained, as hours move toward their midpoint. Fatigue does not accumulate, physiology designed to avoid it, muscle fibers remaining efficient, alertness maintained without tension, hemispheric rest occurring briefly when conditions allow, awareness reduced but not absent, sudden changes still registered, adaptation constant but quiet. As time passes, no marker appears to separate one phase from the next, only gradual transitions, sound, temperature, light, shifting continuously, and through all of it, the nocturnal birds remain embedded in these changes, neither directing nor resisting them, holding position, listening, responding when balance favors action, returning to stillness when it does not, the pattern continuing forward in the same measured way, without acceleration, without closure, sustained by anatomy, environment, and the quiet economy of motion that keeps everything in equilibrium. The night continues without clear division, hours passing as a sequence of small adjustments rather than events, temperature stabilizing near the ground, colder air pooling in hollows, slightly warmer layers remaining higher among branches and structures, sound traveling differently through these layers, bending, softening, sharpening again as density shifts, perches remain in use, bodies unchanged in outline, feathers settling further as air stills, insulation held through overlapping veins and fine down beneath, heat retained close to the skin, loss minimized through posture, the chest moving slowly with each breath, oxygen exchanged efficiently, no excess motion introduced. The head remains angled toward open space, listening ongoing, attention drawn to breaks in regularity rather than volume, a repeated pattern interrupted, a pause that lingers longer than expected, the auditory field updating continuously, memory of recent sounds allowing deviation to emerge, the neck rotating in narrow arcs, alignment refined, then held, movement delayed until resolution improves, patience functioning as a filtering mechanism, reducing error, conserving energy. When flight occurs again, it remains brief and precise, wings opening in controlled sequence, primary feathers separating just enough to manage airflow, serrated edges disrupting turbulence before sound forms, secondary feathers absorbing remaining vibration, Lift generated at low speed, trajectory shallow and direct. Approach steady, the body maintaining orientation throughout, landing immediate, feet extending at the last moment, talons closing with exact pressure, motion ending without rebound, capture contained within function, digestion resuming quietly afterward, stomach processes continuing without urgency, nutrients absorbed gradually, energy distributed across long intervals, feeding events rare but sufficient, body mass maintained within narrow limits, excess avoided, scarcity tolerated. Elsewhere, the environment shifts again, thin clouds passing across stars, brightness changing subtly, wind moving through upper canopy, lower air remaining still, acoustic shadows forming and dissolving, detection range expanding and contracting, responses adjusting without display. In open landscapes, nocturnal prey alters movement as dew thickens, steps slower, pauses longer, sound signatures changing accordingly. In wooded areas, branches cool and stiffen, altering reflection and absorption, familiarity with these changes improving efficiency, behavior shaped by repeated exposure rather than trial. As the night progresses beyond its midpoint, no fatigue accumulates. Physiology prevents it. Slow twitch muscle fibers sustaining posture, neural activity remaining economical, hemispheric rest occurring briefly when conditions allow, awareness reduced but never absent, sudden shifts still registered, the eyes remaining mostly open, pupils wide, light scarce but usable, silhouettes forming briefly against the sky, then dissolving again, visual input confirming what sound has already resolved. As hours continue, the pattern remains consistent, long stillness, brief movement, immediate return to rest, energy conserved, information gathered, balance maintained across forests, grasslands, wetlands, tundra margins, and edges shaped by human presence. The same principles persist: sound-guided detection, silent movement, minimal effort, adaptability expressed through timing and position rather than speed or force. And so the night carries on, not building toward an end, not releasing into conclusion, but unfolding through repetition and subtle variation, holding the same quiet rhythm, listening, adjustment, response, and extended stillness, continuing forward without signal and without pause. The later hours bring a gradual thinning of opportunity, not absence, but narrower windows shaped by cooling ground and settling air, sound carrying farther in some directions, folding back in others, acoustic corridors forming briefly, then dissolving. Perched forms remain attentive, posture unchanged, feathers responding only to gravity and the faint movement of air, insulation holding steady, heat conserved through layered structure, the feet maintaining grip through passive tension alone, no visible effort, joints aligned to distribute weight evenly, muscles resting while readiness remains, the head continuing its small, deliberate adjustments, never sweeping, never abrupt, alignment refined by fractions of a degree, listening remaining selective, background noise filtered automatically, irregular patterns retained, the pause between steps, the uneven rhythm of movement beneath cover, information accumulating quietly, visual confirmation minimal, often unnecessary, sound sufficient to resolve distance and direction, When flight resumes, it is again brief and contained, wings opening smoothly, air displaced without turbulence, lift generated at low speed, glide favored over powered motion, approach shallow, silhouette minimized, landing precise, contact absorbed through joints, stillness immediate, capture efficient and brief, digestion beginning soon after, energy released slowly, supporting long intervals of rest, feeding events spaced widely, no urgency introduced by success. Elsewhere in the landscape, subtle shifts continue, frost thickening on exposed surfaces, altering footfall noise, dew increasing on grasses, changing the way sound is absorbed. In forested areas, trunks cooling and stiffening, reflections sharpening. In open ground, air settling closer to the surface, detection range extending briefly, then narrowing again, responses adjusting without delay, without learning, simply through repeated exposure, the body remaining tuned to these changes. As time moves toward the faint suggestion of morning, light does not yet return, but darkness begins to lose depth, contrast lifting slightly, shadows becoming less absolute, activity tapering, not ending, but becoming more selective, opportunities fewer, waiting longer, energy conserved through restraint, roost sites already chosen, alternatives remembered, entry planned without motion beyond what is required. When the shift to rest begins, it is gradual, wings folding before contact, posture tightening, feathers settling into insulating layers, eyes narrowing, listening continuing at reduced intensity. Awareness maintained just enough to detect disruption. Daytime hours approaching not as a break, but as another phase of low demand, the cycle extending rather than restarting. Across different regions, similar transitions occur under different skies, some places still dark, others already brightening. Responses shaped by local conditions but guided by the same principles: efficiency, patience, balance. And so the pattern continues. Stillness dominant, movement brief and precise, sound guiding response, light influencing timing, energy conserved across long spans. The feathered night watchers remaining embedded within these slow changes, neither arriving nor departing, simply persisting within a rhythm that does not announce itself and does not conclude, continuing forward, quietly, evenly, without interruption. The faint shift toward morning continues almost imperceptibly, darkness thinning not through brightness, but through reduced contrast, edges beginning to separate from shadow, the air holding steady, pressure unchanged, temperature leveling after its lowest point, sound still traveling cleanly across short distances, then diffusing as background activity slowly returns. Perches remain occupied, bodies unchanged in outline, feathers resting in close alignment, insulation maintained through structure rather than motion, the feet continuing their grip through tendon lock alone, no fatigue introduced, posture sustained without effort, the head remaining oriented toward open space, listening ongoing but narrowed, attention focused on fewer variables as opportunity declines, movement beneath cover becoming less frequent, pauses longer, rhythms slowing, information still gathered, but response increasingly delayed, restraint favored as efficiency shifts. When motion occurs, it remains limited, wings opening only when probability justifies expenditure. Lift generated smoothly, approach shallow, landing immediate, capture brief, digestion resuming quietly afterward, energy released gradually, supporting extended rest, feeding events now rare, long stillness returning between them. Elsewhere, the landscape continues its slow adjustment, frost beginning to soften on exposed surfaces, dew redistributing as air temperature stabilizes, insects reducing activity again, soundscape filling with broader, less distinct noise as early diurnal movement begins in distant layers, filtering mechanisms adjusting automatically, sharp irregularities still registered, but fewer demand action, the body preparing gradually for extended rest, not through collapse, but through reallocation, muscle tone easing, sensory thresholds lowering slightly, awareness maintained at a minimal level, roost entry approaching without signal, sites chosen earlier now favored again, cavities, dense foliage, shaded ledges, entry planned through familiarity rather than exploration, wings folding before contact, posture tightening, feathers settling into deeper insulating layers, eyes narrowing, listening continuing at low intensity, hemispheric rest alternating quietly, recovery beginning without interruption, daytime hours extending ahead as a long interval of minimal demand, cellular repair proceeding steadily, proteins rebuilt, feathers maintained, energy redistributed, the environment carrying most visible change now, light increasing, sound broadening, human and avian activity layering over one another, filtered, deprioritized, stillness deepening rather than breaking, across forests, fields, wetlands, tundra edges, and human-altered spaces. Similar quiet conclusions form without ending, not a stop, but a tapering, activity dissolving back into rest, rest preparing for return, the cycle continuing without reset, without emphasis, guided by light, sound, and energy balance, repeating with variation, but holding the same measured rhythm, observation giving way to stillness, stillness giving way to observation again, continuing forward, evenly, quietly, without signal and without final boundary. Light continues to lift without urgency, not yet bright, only thinning the density of shadow, surfaces beginning to separate in tone rather than color, bark distinct from air, ground from grass, the roost holding steady through the change, bodies unmoving, posture compact, feathers settled into their most insulating alignment, heat retained efficiently as ambient temperature stabilizes, circulation easing outward slightly as cold releases its hold, respiration remaining slow, steady, unremarkable, digestion continuing without interruption, nutrients absorbed gradually, energy distributed toward maintenance rather than activity, the head angled down now, neck relaxed, rotation minimal, listening reduced but present, awareness held just above absence, enough to register disruption, not enough to invite response, soundscape broadening as distant layers awaken, diurnal birds shifting, insects warming, human movement beginning far away, these sounds arriving as continuous bands rather than discrete events, filtered automatically, stripped of relevance, only sharp irregularities retained. Few appear, stillness deepening rather than breaking, rest becoming the dominant process, not sleep as separation, but as a lowering of demand, hemispheric cycles alternating quietly, one side resting while the other maintains minimal vigilance, balance preserved without tension, the environment continuing its slow rearrangement, dew evaporating from grasses, frost retreating from shaded edges, air warming in shallow gradients, light reflecting more evenly, camouflage strengthening as brightness increases, plumage patterns dissolving outlines further, mottling blending with bark, streaking aligning with reeds and shadows, posture reinforcing concealment, the body narrowing, shadow minimized. During brief moments of wakefulness, maintenance occurs. A slow preen, a feather drawn through the beak, barbs realigned, oils distributed sparingly, grooming ending quickly, exposure avoided, repair continuing internally, muscle fibers recovering, microfractures in bone addressed, feather follicles renewing, processes unfolding without awareness. As hours pass, activity remains minimal, no impulse to move, no trigger sufficient to overcome efficiency. Shade preferred, airflow chosen, cavities and dense foliage holding stable microclimates, heat exchanged slowly, moisture loss minimized, the day advancing as a long plateau of low demand, not empty, but even toward afternoon. Light angle shifts again, contrast softening near ground level, temperature easing, readiness building slowly beneath rest, metabolic rate rising just enough to support alertness, muscle tone returning incrementally, not as tension, but as availability, the head lifting a few degrees, listening widening again, the sound field reorganizing, insects changing pitch and density, small mammals adjusting movement, birds shifting position, information accumulating quietly, no action yet, only alignment, the cycle preparing to turn once more, not announced, not deliberate, simply responding to conditions that have shifted again. And as evening begins to gather at the edges of light, the same measured pattern waits to resume. Stillness giving way to observation, observation to brief response, response back to stillness, continuing forward without reset, without closure, held within a rhythm shaped by light, sound, and balance, repeating quietly, evenly, and without end. Evening deepens again in small increments, light slipping lower across surfaces without a clear boundary, shadows merging rather than lengthening, temperature easing down from the day's peak, heat releasing slowly from soil, stone, and bark, air movement returning near ground level, sound shifting texture as density changes, higher frequencies carrying farther again, low vibrations settling close to the surface. Resting forms remain still through this transition, posture unchanged, feathers adjusting microscopically as cooling begins, insulation reestablished through layered structure, circulation redirecting warmth inward, extremities remaining functional without excess loss, the head lifting slightly higher, angle refined by a few degrees, listening widening once more, attention expanding beyond the immediate perch, early movement registering at field margins and along paths worn through grass, small mammals emerging cautiously, pauses long between steps, roots indirect, acoustic signatures distinct against the thinning background, the facial plane aligning toward open space, feather contours settling into precise curvature, sound gathered and directed inward, ear asymmetry sharpening vertical resolution, distance inferred through timing rather than volume, the neck rotating slowly, alignment refined, then held, stillness maintained until probability increases, wings remain folded, joints loose but ready, the first movement of the active phase delayed until conditions align, light low enough to reduce exposure, soundscape open enough for clarity, wind direction stable. When motion begins, it remains controlled, takeoff smooth, wings opening gradually, air displaced evenly, lift generated without haste, ascent shallow, glide extended, energy expenditure minimal, approach angles chosen to avoid silhouette, ground cover masking movement, landing precise, feet extending only at the final moment, talons closing with controlled pressure, motion ending immediately, capture brief and contained, digestion beginning soon after, stomach processes working steadily, nutrients released over time. Supporting long intervals of quiet, feeding events spaced widely, rest resuming without transition, the environment continuing its gradual adjustment, insects increasing as temperatures settle, some species replacing others, calls overlapping briefly, then thinning again, prey activity rising in short windows, then pausing, detection recalibrating continuously, listening adapting with each shift, the night building not as a single state, but as a sequence of usable conditions, selected through patience as darkness settles fully. Activity remains sparse, not every opportunity taken. Efficiency guiding choice across forests, open fields, wetlands, tundra margins, and altered landscapes. The same principles persist: low light, sound-guided detection, silent movement, energy balanced across hours rather than moments. Roosts for the coming day already known, alternatives remembered, disturbance avoided through relocation rather than defense, spacing maintained without interaction, communication minimal, presence understated. And through these changes, the feathered night watchers remain integrated into the slow movement of air, sound, and diminishing light, acting only when balance favors action, resting when it does not, holding stillness as an active state, listening as a constant process, movement as a brief and precise adjustment, the cycle continuing forward, measured, unhurried, without emphasis and without conclusion. Darkness settles into its most even phase again, cloud layers smoothing remaining contrast, moonlight diffused into a low, uniform glow, ground and canopy blending into a single field of muted tone, sound becoming the primary source of structure, faint movements carrying across short distances before dissolving. Perched forms remain unchanged, bodies unmoving, feathers responding only to gravity and the slow drift of air, insulation holding steady, heat conserved through overlap and trapped air, the feet maintaining grip through passive tension alone, joints aligned to distribute weight without strain, muscles resting while readiness remains available, the head angled slightly forward, facial contours oriented toward open space, listening narrowing rather than expanding. background sound reduced to a thin band, irregularities standing out with greater clarity, a brief disturbance beneath grass, a pause where rhythm should continue, information accumulating quietly, visual confirmation minimal, often unnecessary, sound sufficient to resolve direction and distance, the neck rotating by small increments, alignment refined, then held, movement delayed until certainty improves, restraint functioning as efficiency, conserving energy while reducing error. When flight resumes, it remains brief and contained, wings opening just enough to generate lift, feathers separating smoothly, airflow guided across textured edges that disrupt turbulence before sound forms, glide extended, descent shallow, energy expenditure minimal, approach steady, the body never accelerating beyond what control allows, landing precise, contact absorbed through joints, motion ending immediately, digestion beginning soon after, stomach processes working slowly, nutrients absorbed over extended time, waste compacted efficiently, long intervals between feeding events remaining normal, rest returning at once. Stillness resuming as the dominant state. Elsewhere, the landscape continues its gradual shifts. Dew thickening on grasses, altering absorption of sound, leaves cooling and stiffening, changing reflection, humidity settling near water, carrying low-frequency vibration farther, responses adjusting automatically, without rehearsal, without display, the night not uniform, but a sequence of usable and unusable moments, selected through patience. As hours progress further, fatigue does not accumulate. Physiology prevents it. Slow twitch fibers sustaining posture, neural activity remaining economical, hemispheric rest occurring briefly when conditions allow, awareness reduced but not absent, sudden changes still registered, the eyes remaining mostly open, pupils wide, light scarce but usable, silhouettes forming briefly against the sky, then dissolving again, visual input confirming what sound has already resolved, time passing without markers, only gradual transitions in sound, temperature, and air movement, and through all of it, the feathered night watchers remain embedded within these changes, neither directing nor resisting them, holding position, listening, responding when balance favors action, returning to stillness when it does not, the pattern continuing forward in the same measured way, without acceleration, without resolution, sustained by anatomy, environment, and the quiet economy of motion that keeps the system in balance. The later portion of the night unfolds with little variation, air settling into stable layers, temperature holding within a narrow range, sound traveling predictably now, fewer distortions, fewer false signals, perches remain occupied without shift, bodies unchanged in outline, feathers settled into their most efficient arrangement, insulation steady, heat retained with minimal loss, respiration slow and regular, oxygen exchanged without visible effort, the skeletal frame bearing weight through alignment rather than tension, joints resting in positions designed for duration, muscles quiet, readiness preserved through structure rather than activation. The head remains angled toward open space, facial contours fixed in a shallow curve, listening continuous but selective, attention narrowing to infrequent irregularities, a single displacement beneath grass, a pause that lingers too long, sound alone sufficient to define location, the neck adjusting by a fraction, alignment refined, then held, movement delayed until certainty outweighs cost, restraint functioning as a primary strategy, conserving energy across long spans. When motion occurs, it is brief and final, wings opening smoothly, air displaced in wide, slow sheets, turbulence broken before sound forms, glide extended, approach shallow, silhouette minimized, landing precise, contact absorbed cleanly, stillness immediate, digestion resuming quietly afterward, stomach processes continuing without urgency, nutrients released slowly, supporting long intervals of inactivity, feeding events few but sufficient, balance maintained without surplus. The surrounding environment continues its gradual drift, clouds thinning and thickening again, humidity settling closer to the ground, dew increasing on exposed surfaces, acoustic properties shifting slightly, responses adjusting without pause. In open areas, prey movement slows further, steps cautious, pauses long, sound signatures faint but distinct. In wooded spaces, cooling bark alters reflection, familiarity with these changes improving efficiency, behavior shaped by repetition rather than decision. As time advances toward the faint suggestion of morning, darkness begins to lose depth, not through brightness, but through reduced contrast, edges softening, activity tapering further, waiting lengthening, energy conserved through inaction, roost sites already chosen, memory guiding return paths, entry planned without exploration. When rest deepens, it does so gradually, wings folding before contact, posture tightening, feathers settling into insulating layers, eyes narrowing, listening continuing at low intensity, hemispheric rest alternating quietly, awareness reduced but intact, daytime approaching not as an end, but as another extended interval of low demand, repair processes beginning to dominate, cellular renewal, feather maintenance, energy redistribution, the environment carrying most visible change now, light increasing, sound broadening, motion belonging to others, filtered and deprioritized, stillness deepening rather than breaking. Across landscapes and latitudes, the same quiet taper repeats, activity dissolving back into rest, rest preparing for return, the cycle extending forward without reset, without emphasis, guided by light, sound, and balance, continuing evenly, quietly, without signal and without final boundary. Light begins to return in its softest form, not as brightness, but as a thinning of darkness, contrast easing rather than breaking, shadows losing depth before edges gain clarity, air holding steady, temperature no longer falling, sound changing character again as distant layers awaken, broader noise filling space without sharp definition. Perches remain occupied, bodies unmoving, posture compact and efficient, feathers settled into their most insulating alignment, heat retained without effort, circulation easing outward slightly as cold releases, respiration slow, regular, unremarkable, the head lowered a fraction, neck relaxed, rotation minimal, listening continuing at reduced intensity, awareness held just above absence, enough to register disruption, not enough to invite response. Sound arriving now as continuous bands, filtered automatically, stripped of relevance, only sudden irregularity retained. Few appear, stillness deepening rather than ending, rest becoming the dominant process, not a stop, but a redistribution of demand. Hemispheric cycles alternating quietly, recovery unfolding without interruption, internal repair proceeding steadily, muscle fibers renewing, feathers maintained, cellular processes continuing in balance, the surrounding environment carrying visible change, light increasing, temperature rising in shallow gradients, vegetation responding, insects warming, diurnal movement layering over the sound field, all passing without engagement, camouflage strengthening as brightness grows, patterns dissolving outlines further, posture narrowing profile, shadow minimized, hours extending ahead as a long, even interval, no urgency introduced, no signal marking transition, and beneath this growing light, the same structures remain, the same alignments held, readiness resting quietly within stillness, as the cycle prepares without declaration to ease once more toward fading light, cooling air, thinning sound, and the slow return of listening as the primary state, balance maintained, rhythm unbroken, the process continuing evenly, quietly, without beginning and without end. If you enjoy peaceful stories like this, you are warmly invited to subscribe and return whenever you need to slow down.